Preface. It was the sound that woke her, a piercing cry of a bird calling out. Tai-San's eyes flicked open, startled by what she was hearing. The harsh screech of a gull, wings fluttering, joined quickly by that of several more, a cacophony of noise growing in intensity, curious at this newcomer in their midst. Tai-San quickly leapt off her bed, moving to the window in her cabin to try and gauge her surroundings. With the seagulls darting around, it could only mean one thing. They must be approaching land, their destination, wherever that destination might be. Opening the window, Tai-San breathed in a welcome intake of fresh air, the sea breeze rustling her hair as it rushed into the cabin. More seagulls raced past her window, squawking in anticipation as they clustered around the back of the ship, joining in a feeding frenzy as the powerful engines churned up frothy waters, bringing fish to the surface in their wake. Angling her head to the side to get a better look at the front, she could see the bow of the ship plowing through the water, throwing up mists of spray. But it was clear to her from sensing the movement of the vessel that they were gradually slowing down. The ship on a slight angle as it altered course, heading towards the large landmass before them. The land itself seemed hostile, unwelcoming, a stark series of jagged cliff faces towering above the waters, their rocky silhouettes under the shadow of bleak, ominous clouds. The sun, yet to pierce through the dark morning skies, the only life outside being the seagulls greeting the ship. Tai-San felt a sense of foreboding, nervous in anticipation of where they were going, why they were going there, and what it all meant for her. The ship had been traveling for many days and nights, and Tai-San herself felt further away than ever before from the city that had once been her home. She missed the mall rats greatly. They were not only her tribe, but her closest friends and allies. Since the demise of the adults, they had become more like her new family. Her heart ached with the pain of being so far away from them, especially Lex. He was more than just her lover, the only true one for her. She missed his voice, his very presence, the tenderness of his touch, his spirit, his lively personality that was always so full of surprises, brightening each of Tai-San's days with his life force as it used to do. Thinking of Lex and the many times he made her laugh, the wonderful moments they had shared made Tai-San smile. But each recollection also stabbed at her heart with the ache that she was no longer with him. Now, more than ever before, she felt truly alone, as if the unknown land before her was another world, and that the life she once knew and the people she cared for was in another lifetime, when she had once been free, an independent spirit. For too long, Tai-San had been a captive. This voyage was the latest in a number of journeys she had been forced to take since losing her freedom. She had lived the life of a slave, passed from owner to owner, bought and sold like an inanimate object, treated like a possession, stripped away of her very humanity, but never her self-respect. She held on to that with every ounce of her fiber and being, determined that no matter the adversities inflicted upon her by her captors, she would never forget where she had come from or who she was. She wouldn't lose her sense of identity, her dignity. If she ever did, she knew in her heart she would only lose herself forever. By retaining her spirit, she somehow would always remain free. Her current master called himself the Broker. He had bought Tai-San at a slave auction many months earlier. Prior to that, she had lived in an arduous existence performing manual slave labor in the fields, an agonizing routine filled with back-breaking work, day after day with no respite. The broker, by contrast, for some reason, put Tai-san in a state of material comfort prior to embarking upon this latest voyage, and she could never understand why. For many months, she had lived in the Gardens of the East, a once luxury hotel from the adult era. She had been given her own room, was always well fed, but had spent most of her days alone in confinement. The only times she had human contact was when the guards brought her meals, a fresh change of clothes, or when she was taken for questioning, meetings, as he liked to call them, with the broker, the master of her enslavement. The broker had asked her many times about her experiences at Eagle Mountain, the mysterious, abandoned scientific base in an apparent observatory not far from Tai-san's own city. She had gone there with the mall rats not long after the virus, and they had discovered equipment, cryptic messages the adults had put in place for the surviving younger generation to inherit and use in the aftermath of the adults' own extinction. The broker had wanted to know everything in fine detail and had interrogated Tai-san repeatedly about what she had seen, double-checking facts, information, meticulous in his research and line of questions. But it was his interest in the lives of the members of the mall rats, as well as Tai-san's own life story, that had initially bewildered and then caused Tai-san concern. She had been reluctant to tell him anything. Her life was private. What she had done, where she had been, her thoughts on her tribe, these were all cherished memories, precious for only herself to know. Even had she chosen to cooperate, Eagle Mountain was in fact a complete mystery. And clearly, whatever the reasons behind the interrogation, the broker was as intrigued about the existence of Eagle Mountain as she and the mall rats had been. But Tai-san was wise enough to realize that her very survival was very much dependent upon the broker believing she had information which could be useful. So she played along. It was her only hope of fighting back, drip-feeding details which were sometimes fabricated. She had felt she had no other option. Silence on her part would come at a price that was too high to pay. The broker was the one in the position of power and had used it ruthlessly, relentlessly, trying to break down Tai-san's barriers of resistance. She had allowed him to believe she had been broken. Perhaps that is why he called himself the broker, Tai-san rued at the time. But unknown to him, her spirit remained strong, and this fueled her stoic resolve, aware that she was the real one in power. Then, unexpectedly, Tai-san had been taken from the hotel by the broker and brought aboard a cargo ship, the Leviathan. She didn't know what or who else was on board besides herself, the broker, and a number of guards who periodically checked in on her, making sure she remained in her cabin, perhaps that she was still alive. Now, Tai-san's mind raced with the uncertainty of what the journey all meant and what lay ahead for her as the approaching landmass loomed closer and closer. The sun's rays started to peek through the clouds, flowing through the window, causing Tai-san to see her reflection in the glass pane, staring back at her. "Don't forget who you are," Tai-san urged herself in a whisper. Clenching her fist, she summoned the vestiges of her inner strength, vowing to stay strong, to somehow stay true to who she was when all else was so uncertain around her. Staring out at the land, she knew that whatever was going to happen, she would find the answer soon, and she promised herself the broker would never crush her spirit, that she would be ready for whatever the future would bring. The Leviathan was a large cargo ship, the biggest Tai-san had ever been on in her many travels since becoming a slave, and being transported from one place to another. But the ship was dwarfed by the size of the port it had docked in. In the time of the adults, this must have been a busy shipping route, Tai-san judged, imagining the hustle and bustle of international trade in its heyday. Her eyes scanned the vicinity, seeing if she could recognize any signs or landmarks, something to show which port in the world they might be in. Around them stood row upon row of cargo containers, stacked high in uneven lines of walls, imprecisely placed, like a child's building blocks, as if they might tumble over. Giant cranes towered higher still, immobile, frozen in time, rusting hulks of junk, but also monuments to the old days that had once been, a past civilization that was no more. They were standing on the large concrete pad of the dockside like ants beside the ship that had carried them there. Nature seemed to be reclaiming the land, with plant life forcing its way through the various cracks in the foundations. Tai-san was beside the broker, the two of them surrounded protectively by his forces. The guards had weapons poised, primed for action, as they scanned the periphery of the port in a state of alert. For all the time they had spent together over many months, Tai-san had never truly gotten to know the broker. Where he had tried to find out everything about her, she had been unable to find out anything about him, apart from his blatant cruel streak and matter-of-fact ruthless efficiency in carrying out his actions. But, to her surprise, Tai-san could now sense a vulnerability in the broker, or more precisely, fear. His eyes darted furtively back and forth, surveying the scene. Beads of sweat were on his brow, and he cleared his throat from time to time to relieve the tension within. Tai-san wondered what it could be that was making him and his forces so on edge, and how whatever or whoever was affecting them so much could impact her. Perhaps it was the fact that the only cargo that had been on board appeared to be Tai-san, the broker, and his guards. The Leviathan's cargo doors were open, and its enormous hold revealed nothing but a cavernous emptiness, echoing the footsteps of some of the broker's forces who moved around inside the ship. Had there been a mistake in the delivery? Had the entire voyage been to no avail? Was this the karma that the broker deserved? Had someone double-crossed him? Tai-san was surprised to hear another sound further away, the sound of distant laughter, childish giggling. The broker's guards defensively aimed their weapons at the source of the sound. A group of very young children were scampering in the waters lapping into the harbor, searching through flotsam and jetsam that had washed ashore. It was like a sea of debris from the adult times. The banks of the harbor awash in a tide of rubbish, plastic bottles, garbage bags. Rotten fish decayed at the surface. The waters filthy, thick with mud, grime. The children looked feral in their barely fitting, ragged clothes, were covered in sores, flies buzzing around them, and had visible cuts and bruises. Tai-san was shocked, repulsed by the sight. Whatever land she was now in, she quickly realized that there were strays, just as there were in her own land, those not members or under the protection of any tribe. It was pitiful. Suddenly, the loud sound of engines rumbled into the port. The weight of the vehicles vibrating and almost shaking the very ground itself.
Finally.
The broker exhaled nervously to himself as he gazed ahead at a fleet of long-haul transport trucks approaching. followed by a convoy of other vehicles which looked strangely futuristic to Tai-san. The impoverished young children stopped their playing and instead ran for cover, nervously ducking behind the debris washed up around them. They appeared to be panic-stricken. From the broker and guard's uneasy demeanor, Tai-san wondered what was about to occur. But it was soon clear that the newcomers who had driven into the port weren't there for a fight. They were there to trade. The Leviathan was quickly loaded with all manner of goods, the delivery trucks driving right up to the cargo hold so that the items they had carried could be placed inside. There were domestic household appliances, a sports car from the adult days, its polished chrome glistening in the sun, but of little value in the new world, with clean water more of a sought-after commodity, as evidenced now with several containers being loaded, along with cattle being led inside the hold. But mostly there was agricultural food. A mountain of grain was accumulating in the vessel as workers carried buckets full to the brim, dumping out the contents, piling it further, higher. A smaller heap of rice was growing in size in the middle of the ship as it too was unloaded from the trucks. All of this produce and selection of goods were being exchanged for the one thing that the broker had brought to these shores after the long voyage of many miles. It was Tai-san herself. To her shock, she was being traded again and couldn't believe her worth or value was ever measured in so much food. It could feed so many people for so long. What had she ever done to become such a commodity of equal value? Who were these people, the ones giving so much so they could take possession of her? What did they want from her? While the workers continued loading the ship, an advanced party from the futuristic vehicles arrived. They were dressed in protective decontamination suits. Some of the entourage wore strange medical masks and plastic gloves. And they were being very careful of Tai-san, treating her gently like a prized possession as they started to examine her, monitoring different aspects, determining her status. None of them had asked permission, even spoken to Tai-san to inquire how she might feel about proceedings. She had got accustomed to being treated as an object rather than a person in her many dealings as a slave, but still felt a sense of shame. Indignity in the way in which she was being examined like a laboratory specimen without having any say in the matter. There was nothing she could do to stop them, though, she realized, and all she could do was try and keep her integrity intact as best as she could, not show emotion, any sign of weakness that her new masters could exploit. She wouldn't give them that. It was a humiliating ordeal, inhuman, invasive, taking away her rights. They, whoever they were, seemingly had control of even her own body, but she would never allow them to possess her spirit. Her height and weight were recorded, her temperature taken, pulse, some blood tests conducted, her body measurements taken, her oral hygiene was checked, teeth probed one by one, details recorded in a tablet computer. Her hair and scalp were painstakingly examined, presumably for lice or some other form of infestation, perhaps disease of some kind. A piece of equipment Tai-san never even knew existed was put against her eyes, and a wisp of cloud squirted closely onto the surface, making her eyes water as the machine somehow read her retina, making a recording of the details of her very eyes. And through her haze, Tai-san couldn't help but notice an image of herself appearing on all of the tablet screens, matching the very same photograph the broker had in his possession when she first encountered him. and she surmised that this exercise was probably some official confirmation of not only facial recognition, but identity. Tai-san closed her eyes, slowed her breath, deep in meditation in an effort to stay calm. Imagining she was in another place, back at her home in the mall with her beloved tribe, as the medical scientific unit performed more sets of blood tests, finally injecting needles painfully into Tai-san's arms, forced outstretched by some of the broker's guards. Tai-san wondered if she was being somehow immunized against something. The only question was, what? The unit examined the monitors of their machines and tablet computers, punched in data, and left, passing a stranger who emerged from a vehicle at the head of the convoy. Tai-san was quickly aware that whoever this person was, he was clearly powerful, and she could tell from the respect given in his demeanor by the broker that this new figure had to be of high authority in this land. He was about Tai-san's age, tall, exuded confidence, almost bordering on arrogance, as he signed a bill of goods and said somewhat cynically,
"It would appear our transaction is complete. I just hope the enormous value I paid is worth it."
Tai-san could sense that there was more than a sexual inference as he cast a glance down her body, looking over her appreciatively. Tai-san detecting some lasciviousness in his gaze, as well as pride at having secured her. "Who are you?" Tai-san asked cautiously.
"Life and death."
The stranger replied, amidst a charming smile.
"Do you have her data?"
he asked the broker. The broker nodded and handed over a hard drive.
You'll find all the information and details in this drive, Selector,
the broker said. Tai-san listened and watched in growing unease as the apparent selector signed more documents, handing them back to the broker before indicating to the paramilitary guards surrounding him.
"Place the cargo in the vehicle. We need to keep on schedule,"
the selector stated eagerly. "Where are you taking me?" Tai-san interrupted.
"To the future and the Creator."
He smiled at some unknown irony in his own comment and responded with more than a hint of menace and veiled threat.
"We all have a long journey ahead."
Chapter 1.
The motorcade made its way through a range of winding roads across a seemingly endless barren land. In the front and rear of the convoy were military vehicles carrying the militia who had been at the docks. Around Tai-san's vehicle, she was flanked by several more on each side. Her vehicle was armor-plated, driverless, and she was its only occupant, with no means of escape. The doors were locked from the outside. It was clearly automated without even a steering wheel or pedals. No driving seat or dashboard, controlled and moving as if by an unseen force. The barren landscape looked almost primitive, with no signs of life, as if from the beginning of time. And yet this vehicle was futuristic, and whoever was controlling it had access to advanced technology. Before the darkness descended, and in the times of the old world, artificial intelligence had become more prominent. But this vehicle seemed to be so very far advanced, and Tai-san wondered if someone was controlling it remotely from another location, or perhaps from one of the other vehicles in the long convoy, or if her course had already been preordained and planned, programmed by a computer system somewhere, somehow. She had cuts on her hands from the efforts she had initially made to get out of the vehicle. Unable to open the doors, she had bashed her fists against the thick glass of the windows in an attempt to break out in some way, even kicked from her seat, striving to prise a way through, but it was no use. She was being taken somewhere and could do nothing to influence matters. She wouldn't give up, though. If there was a way to escape or alter her fate, she was determined to find it, or at the very least, to try. The selector was transported in a vehicle of the militia at the head of the convoy, and throughout the journey, Tai-san felt a continual sense of foreboding as she wondered why he had gone to such efforts to take her into his custody. And above all, who or what was the creator the selector had referred to? Tai-san tried to assess how many miles they had traveled, but it was difficult to ascertain. All the terrain looked the same, desolate, barren, harsh, lifeless, apart from their own convoy. She hadn't even seen any wildlife of any kind, not even a single solitary bird since leaving the port, let alone any landmarks. The earth was mostly colored red, making Tai-san feel as if she was on a different planet. The wind gusts threw up clouds of dust like red snow covering the vehicles, the windshield wipers working back and forth rhythmically to keep the front screen clear. Some of the road seemed blackened, charred in places, with potholes on the road, its tarmac melted, crumbling. And judging by some mammoth craters, which Tai-san noticed, there had been some explosions at some point in time. Huge explosions. Tai-san tried somehow to put any notion of a post-apocalyptic event out of her mind, but the thought continued to prevail, especially as she became aware of acres and acres of large animal bones, carcasses of cattle looking like fossils of dinosaurs. Had there been a drought, a famine, a war, some accident? Was it the result of the virus somehow, or something more ominous, sinister? As the journey continued, Tai-san spotted sudden warning biohazard signs on the roadside, alerting their viewer to not pass any further. Warning of extreme danger, with any presence being strictly prohibited. Yet the convoy continued relentlessly, paying no heed or notice to whatever threat there had once been, or still could be, Tai-san contemplated. A mile or so later, Tai-san spotted the first grave. An unmarked grave, the first of many, stood in the emptiness around, quickly becoming row upon row of graves as far as the eye could see on both sides of the road. Endless long lines of gravestones indicating the extreme loss of life that had befallen the region. It was overwhelming and very moving. Tai-san could hardly contain her emotions. So upset was she at the suffering and waste, bringing back memories of what had occurred in her own land, which sent a shiver down her spine, recalling the sheer scale of loss. Parents, friends, family, with the very real threat that the human race would become extinct. Tai-san had at least one connection with the occupants of this strange and desolate land. The experience of suffering, loss, the memorials to so many who had gone before. It made Tai-san angry at the senselessness of it. The virus, or whatever caused these people to die, was something that had to be beaten, Tai-san vowed. Somehow, life just had to go on. Not only her own life, but the lives of others. Humanity had to endure, not become extinct. The graves marked a sad tribute and also a stark reminder that everyone's time was limited, that life was precious. Tai-san would never forget that. No matter how dire her own situation could be, she was still alive and determined to make her own life count, to honor herself along with all those who perished, to give justice to the gift that life was so it could reach its full potential. Her feelings of fighting back against death itself, or those who stood in the way of life, surged when the graves receded, and finally signs of life began to show in what had been so far an otherwise lifeless land. Grass sprouted up around the roads, becoming fields, rolling hills. A gradual change was taking shape with every passing mile that unfolded. There was life after all, and hope. As the journey continued, the fields evolved into agricultural pastures, plains, cultivated, worked upon by farm workers, probably slaves, Tai-san reasoned, tirelessly toiling in the soil, raising crops. Some plowed fields, others sowed seeds, more still harvested some warded crops. The workers didn't even cast a glance at the passing convoy and seemed almost roboticized, paying more attention to images projected on some outbuildings as if advertising some forthcoming event, the Cube, coming soon. Tai-san noticed that some of the pastures the convoy passed were full of sheep, cattle, supervised by their herders, who once again paid no attention to the vehicles in the convoy that sped past, which Tai-san found strange and unnerving, fueling her uncertainty of what might lay ahead. What was certain, though, was that the area was teeming with life, plant, animal, and human. Such a contrast to what had been the barren landscape, the rows upon rows of graves. She was in a society rebuilding, growing and organized too, compared to whatever destruction had occurred. Now her vehicle made a notification pinging sound from within, which signaled, unbeknownst to Tai-san, she had arrived at her next destination. Her journey was over, but in reality had only just begun. Tai-san had arrived at the lakeside resort, so named because it was precisely that, an alpine resort complex that overlooked a large body of water, and clearly at one time would have been luxurious, but was now decaying and in decline, being reclaimed by nature, with plant life sprouting throughout the walls, even branches of trees puncturing the infrastructure. The view, though, was beautiful. A spectacular location with the hotel facilities placed so its occupants would have had the best view on offer of nature's wonders. The lake's waters looked clean, shimmering in the sun, inviting anyone who viewed them to go in for a swim. Around the lake were snow-capped mountains, rolling hills, covered in all manner of trees, a forested area. Birds and insects flew around. The lake clearly the heart of an ecosystem supporting so much life, perhaps even the humans who lived here, Tai-san reasoned. The selector personally escorted her to the entrance of the resort, advising that this was to be her temporary home, that she would find everything she needed to make her stay comfortable. The selector explained that although she would be welcome to live in the resort on a temporary basis, she couldn't leave. Ever. He warned her this was for her own protection, that it wasn't safe in any event for her to be in the outside environs, or for her to be on her own, even if she was able to escape. Around the perimeter of the resort, Tai-san noted what she perceived were surveillance cameras, and also guards had been established in their positions on watch. The selector soon left after leading Tai-san into the main lobby. He told her that he had other business to attend to for the creator, and hoped that she would enjoy her stay and that he would be in touch very soon. Tai-san wandered out of the lobby and decided to explore the resort. Apart from the guards on the outside perimeters, she appeared to be the only guest. She wondered if perhaps there were other staff there. Security? It became apparent, though, that she was indeed alone as she walked through the long, empty corridors. It was like being among the ghosts of the past, the resort providing an eerie connection to the old days. She could easily imagine the sound of children, happy families, spending time there on holiday, enjoying the facilities and all that the lake complex had to offer. The restaurant was empty, tables abandoned, gathering dust. A children's play center stood idle, toys littering the room, unused anymore. Tai-san thought of the poor children she had seen at the docks. Why weren't they the ones here? They should be living in such a place with its comfort and resources, not her. The world was truly crazy as it was unpredictable and confusing. Did she have an assigned room? Where was she meant to go? What was she meant to do? She couldn't see any evidence of security cameras, but considered there could be some hidden somewhere, and she wondered if she was being watched by someone, and if so, who and why. Exploring the resort, Tai-san was getting lost in a maze of corridors, eventually arriving in a kitchen area by accident that must have once serviced the bars and restaurants. To her surprise, she could smell traces of food. The kitchen must have been used recently, had to have been. There was no way that the residue of meals could have been left over from the adult times. Or were her senses so heightened that her mind was fueling her natural expectation? After examining further, she realized that there was indeed no one else around. She was well and truly alone, or so she thought. Tai-san's expression clouded in a mixture of concern and confusion as she suddenly heard what she perceived to be splashing when she passed a different part of the resort where signs indicated there was a pool. Someone else was there. There was no doubt about it. Confirmed especially when Tai-san heard laughter emanating from the pool area. Tentatively approaching the entrance to the pool, she grasped the handle on the doorway and, taking a deep breath, bracing herself for whoever could be there, she opened the door and stepped inside. Tai-san quickly became aware of a large swimming pool, but it was the people in the water that so astonished her. She felt like she truly was seeing ghosts, faces she only knew all too well. Was this for real or just a dream? "Watch this," the young man shouted as he ran, diving from the side of the pool into the water with a mighty splash.
"Not bad,"
the young lady replied. She was lounging in a sunbed and added with a mischievous grin,
"But I bet I could do better. Stand back, amateur."
The young lady got to her feet, preparing to jump, to water bomb, and it was then that Tai-san just knew that it really was who she thought it was. "Alice?" Tai-san's voice called out, almost in disbelief. "Is that really you?" Alice's mouth gaped open. She was frozen in astonishment, dumbstruck at seeing Tai-san standing before her. She tried to reply, but simply couldn't. The young man turned from the pool he had dived into and exchanged long glances with Tai-san, who questioned in utter amazement, "Ryan?" "Tai-san, it is you," Ryan replied, equally amazed and in delight, drowned out by Alice, who exuberantly tried somehow to contain her emotion and joy at seeing Tai-san.
"Tai-san, what are you doing here?"
Alice called out in pure disbelief.